Hi, Sven here. Delighted to spend a little time with you today. So, our goal in three parts is to look at leadership impact. How can you achieve the goals you seek as a leader? How do you influence others? How do you achieve those great things that can happen? So, those three parts first is look at one, how do we read others? Second, how do we acknowledge the different perspectives and styles of the people in your team or your audience? And third, how do you choose the right leadership style for the situation? So let's take a look at those quickly. All right, so there you go, empathy, perspective, and style. And then finally, leadership flexibility. So we think about empathy first. This is that ability to read other people. All right, so it is easy to say, but empathy is quite a difficult thing. And I don't want to make this too complicated, but think that as social creatures, and this is true of any social creatures, we have to be able to read each other. Humans together are much more powerful than humans apart. And what makes the core difference and what defines effective, sustainable leadership in our time is that ability to enhance your empathy. Now, I don't think there's such a thing as no empathy, but I also think you can have too much empathy. So it's useful to put a little bit of structure to this concept of empathy. Now, we know from research on the brain that it is quite clear we can exercise three components of empathy. The first is the ability to be physically present for another human being or people. The second is to be able to read the emotions that another person is experiencing. And the third is to be able to get a sense of the thoughts of another person. So we can think of these as physical empathy, emotional empathy, and cognitive empathy. So let's take a look at this in a sort of simple framework. What I've found really useful over the years is to think of this as impact and skill. All right, so clearly we want to raise our impact, but we want to do it with skill. Now, it is worth acknowledging there are people who are actually hostile. These are people, perhaps 1% of the population, that enjoy your suffering, Schadenfreude. Now, you want to watch those folk. They will avoid power and they'll exploit the weak. So there you have negative empathy. Secondly, we have, if you like, the low empathy, but with no ill will. So in a way, some components of autism include poor social skills. It's not that these people want to be negative, but they simply don't have the empathy skills available or part of those empathy skills. Then the first step you can take as a leader is to step into the space of leadership. This is physical empathy, to be present to someone, to clear the decks, to put away your phone, to be 100% present, alert, and attentive to your audience. If you can tick that box, people will believe many things about your care, your interest, and your willingness to help them. So number one, be present. Emotional empathy is the ability to bring feeling into the engagement. So here we need to study facial expressions. We need to understand tone of voice, posture. What is someone signaling to you about what they're feeling? Reading emotions is emotional empathy. And then third, a little more tricky, is cognitive empathy. To be able to ask yourself the question, what is someone thinking? Now, some of that you experience by being present, by knowing that person. Others will be helpful if you can read the emotions, you can get a good idea of what someone might be thinking. And of course, if you listen really carefully and you take a moment to clarify, help me understand, is this what you're thinking? You gain an insight into how people think. Now, ideally, you want to be able to balance this with skill. So that's where really high skill empathy comes. And there's one serious risk in this journey, and that is sympathy. If you allow the emotions of another person to overwhelm your logic, your capacity to help them, you cave in, if you like. We can call this empathic distress. Someone bursts into tears, And all of a sudden, I feel terrible. I feel so guilty. I feel awful for them. All I want to do is take away the problem. That is sympathy, right? When you do something to relieve someone else's suffering, often because it relieves your suffering. And this is where you get compassion fatigue. And for me, many leaders, this risk of too much emotion, of allowing the negative emotions of others to affect you, really undermines your leadership. All right, so we can take this into 4 levels. And, my recommendation to you is see if you can lift your level step by step. So number 1, as we said, physical empathy. Be present, clear the decks, give someone 100% of your attention, listen carefully. All right. Second, to practice reading these facial expressions, to ask yourself the question, I wonder what this person is feeling. To look carefully, notice what the eyes are doing, notice what the eyebrows are doing, the mouth, teeth, jaw. There are thousands of muscles in the face that are giving you critical signals that will give you an insight to how someone is feeling. All right, that's your emotional empathy. And then the cognitive empathy is you use those 2 skills to ask yourself the question, I wonder what they're thinking. Now, sometimes, and this, is a very advanced skill, people get this very intuitively or naturally. My experience is it's learned. You learn it because you either pick it up, or if you're not sure, you ask the question, tell me, have I got this right? All right. So when you acknowledge and you get someone to say, yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking, you have massively, if you like, achieved that negotiator handshake. All right. And a 4th level, and this is particularly important in long-term endeavors, is to really get to know the whole person in your team. You get to know who they partnered up with. Do they have kids? What do the kids do? What are their favorite hobbies? As you understand the whole person you are working with, you'll be able to blend these layers of physical, emotional, and cognitive empathy together with more skill. All right, so I'll leave you with a final slide on this one. A little bit of detail, just to give you a clue. So only pay attention, listen. You make sure, for example, that you might give yourself a 10-minute rest before a meeting. Keep your meeting short. Spend lots of time showing you are physically engaged, and reflect. All right. In reading those facial expressions, I really recommend you look up facial expression training, perhaps through Paul Ekman's work. Do voice training, watch movies, theater. Get interested in what are good performers sharing with their emotions. Acknowledging perspectives, as we said, what I hear you saying is bringing people's voice to the people, as we'll see in the next session. Some people more quiet, you need to encourage them. Other people look more verbose, and you need to maybe slow them down a bit. And then in terms of getting that, know that whole person, this takes time. One has to be patient. One needs to meet outside the work environment, and it's not always appropriate. Thank you. End of part 1.